All right, so today we're going to be looking at global inequality.
Ooh, that's a big one.
It is a big one, and it's something that can sound kind of dry at first glance,
Yeah.
but it is anything but dry
Mm.
because we're really talking about the potential for conflict,
Right.
instability when you have these huge gaps between the haves and have-nots. And for you UPSC folks out there, this is particularly relevant to anybody tackling international relations.
Yeah, for sure. This is a topic that's not just an academic exercise,
Absolutely.
It's really about understanding the forces that shape our world.
Right.
International relations, economic development, all of that.
Totally. And to kind of unpack this a little bit further, we're going to be digging into a text that really explores the politics of aid,
Okay.
how different approaches to development have played out on the global stage.
I like it.
We're talking structural adjustment programs, we're talking poverty reduction strategies,
Yeah.
the whole shebang.
The whole 9 yards.
Now, the text we're looking at makes a pretty compelling case for why global inequality actually matters.
Huh.
And it does so by focusing on three major points: power conflict and personal well-being.
Big ones.
Yeah, they are. So let's break these down a little bit, starting with power. How does inequality actually create an imbalance of power?
Well, I mean, if you think about it, wealth often translates to control.
Right.
Control over resources, over influence. And this can lead to situations where the wealthy elite essentially get to dictate the rules of the game,
Of course.
often at the expense of those who don't have that economic power.
Right.
So, it's kind of a recipe for exploitation and injustice.
So it's not just about having more money.
No.
It's about the influence that comes with that.
Exactly. And this power dynamic plays out in so many ways, from access to education, to healthcare, to even just basic political representation.
Right.
Those who have the money often have the power to shape policies and decisions that impact everyone.
It's true. Okay, so this next point is a big one, particularly for our UPSC listeners out there.
All right.
The link between inequality and conflict.
Yeah.
What's the connection?
Well, I mean, history shows us time and time again that extreme disparities within a society create this breeding ground for resentment and instability.
Okay.
You imagine a nation where a small elite controls the vast majority of the wealth, while the majority are just struggling to make ends meet.
Right.
Tensions are going to rise.
Right.
In some cases, that can boil over into violence and conflict.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like that saying, a hungry man is an angry man.
Yeah.
But we're talking about entire nations here.
Exactly. And on a global scale, those tensions can escalate into, conflicts between nations.
Right.
As the competition for resources and power heats up.
Okay.
Think about, the scramble for oil, the disputes over water rights.
Right.
These things often have roots in these economic disparities.
So we're seeing how inequality isn't just this moral dilemma.
Yeah,
It can actually be a threat to global security.
absolutely. And it goes even deeper than that. The text also talks about the psychological effects of inequality on personal well-being.
Okay, that's an angle I hadn't really considered before.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on that a little?
Well, as humans, we are wired to compare ourselves to others. And when we constantly see ourselves as less than because of our economic standing,
Right.
that can really take a toll on our mental and emotional well-being.
Yeah.
It leads to feelings of hopelessness, despair,
Sure.
fuels a sense of injustice, and that can contribute to social unrest.
So it's about more than just, material possessions. It's about dignity and opportunity.
Absolutely.
It's belonging.
And this is amplified in today's hyper-connected world,
Oh,
for
it
sure,
is.
where we're constantly bombarded with images of wealth and lifestyles that are just totally unattainable for most people.
It's true.
Yeah, so it's like a recipe for dissatisfaction and unrest.
Okay. So far, it seems like, there's a pretty strong case for why global inequality matters.
Yeah,
But I know there are counter arguments.
right.
What are some of those?
Well, one argument is the idea that we should prioritize poverty over inequality, meaning we should focus on lifting everyone out of poverty, even if it means some people get richer faster than others.
So the focus is on the absolute level of poverty
Exactly.
rather than the relative gap between rich and poor.
Right, and proponents of this view might say, a rising tide lifts all boats,
Right.
even if some boats are luxury yachts and others are, just rowboats.
Yeah, I got it. Okay, so then there's the argument that inequality can actually stimulate economic growth.
Yeah.
How does that work?
Well, this one often comes from a more economic liberal perspective.
Okay.
The idea is that by allowing for inequality, you're actually incentivizing hard work and innovation.
Right.
If everyone had the same wealth, there'd be less motivation to strive for more.
Right.
And that could potentially lead to economic stagnation.
So it's kind of like a survival of the fittest approach to the economy.
You could say that, but of course critics would argue that this ignores the very real systemic barriers
Right.
that prevent many people from even entering the race, let alone winning it.
It's like saying everyone has an equal chance of winning a marathon when some people are starting miles behind the starting line.
Exactly. And then there's the perspective that prioritizes individual freedom and national sovereignty above all else.
Okay, so how does this viewpoint address the distribution of wealth?
Well, it essentially says that people should have the freedom to succeed or fail based on their own merits,
Okay.
and that countries should be free to manage their own economies without interference,
Okay.
even if that leads to inequality within their borders.
So from this perspective, even if a nation has a lot of inequality, it's not a global concern,
Right.
as long as its citizens are free to pursue their own economic destinies.
That's one way to interpret it, but it does raise some questions about what freedom really means
Right.
when economic power is concentrated in the hands of a few.
Right, it's true. Okay, so to really understand how these ideas actually play out in the real world,
Yeah.
let's talk about development and the politics of aid. The text really dives into the challenges faced by developing nations in the post-colonial era,
Right.
particularly the economic structures they inherited.
Yeah, many of these nations found themselves kind of stuck in this system where they were primarily exporting raw materials and commodities.
Right,
This is a legacy of their colonial past.
right.
This lack of diversification, made them incredibly vulnerable to fluctuations in global markets.
It's like having all your eggs in one basket and that basket being controlled by someone else.
Exactly. And this vulnerability contributed to a growing debt crisis in the developing world.
Right.
And this really set the stage for the rise of structural adjustment programs, or SAPs.
Okay, SAPs. Now things are getting really interesting
Here we go.
and controversial.
hmm
So what prompted this shift in development policy?
Well, it was a confluence of factors,
Okay.
You had the debt crisis, developing countries struggling to repay loans.
Right.
At the same time, there was this growing ideological shift toward neoliberal economics, which championed free markets and deregulation as the keys to prosperity.
So the IMF and World Bank saw an opportunity to promote their economic vision
You could say that.
on a global scale.
Yeah, the idea behind SAPs was to restructure developing economies
Right.
along these market-oriented lines.
Okay.
The belief was that this would stimulate economic growth and ultimately reduce poverty.
But the actual implementation of SAPs was far from smooth sailing, right?
You could say that.
SAPs became incredibly controversial,
They did.
with critics arguing they caused more harm than good.
Yeah.
So let's get into the specifics. What were the intended benefits of SAPs?
Okay.
And what were the criticisms and these unintended consequences?
Well, the main selling point was that SAPs would promote economic growth by integrating developing economies into the global market.
Okay.
And this, in theory, would attract foreign investment, boost exports, and help lift people out of poverty.
Sounds good on paper.
Yeah.
But did it actually work out that way?
Well, that's where the criticisms come in. Opponents argued that SAPs were based on a flawed model of development. A model that no developed country actually followed in its own early stages of growth.
Interesting.
Developed nations often protected their own industries before embracing free trade,
Right.
once they had achieved a certain level of economic maturity.
It's like do as we say, not as we did.
Precisely. And the results for many developing countries were often devastating.
Okay.
Critics argued that SAPs led to increased poverty cuts in social spending and greater economic instability.
Wow. Okay. Can you give us some concrete examples of how SAPs played out in the real world?
Sure. Take Chile, for example.
Yeah.
Market-oriented reforms, heavily influenced by the Chicago School of Economics,
Right.
led to years of economic disruption and political instability.
Wow.
Or consider the Asian financial crisis of 1997, Malaysia, which refused to accept an IMF loan with its attached conditions.
Okay.
Actually recovered faster than Thailand and South Korea, which followed the IMF's prescriptions.
So the evidence suggests that SAPs didn't exactly deliver on their promises.
That's putting it mildly.
Okay.
Even the IMF and the World Bank eventually acknowledged that SAPs had fallen short of their goals.
Wow.
And had caused significant harm.
So what happened next? Did the international community completely abandon this approach to development?
Not entirely. SAPs were eventually replaced by poverty reduction strategy papers, or PRSPs.
Okay.
These were intended to be more flexible and tailored to individual countries,
Right.
with a greater emphasis on, you guessed it, poverty reduction.
So a kinder, gentler approach to development assistance.
You could say that, but the underlying focus on market-based solutions remained.
Interesting. So we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
We've unpacked the arguments for and against global inequality.
Yeah,
We've delved into the complexities of development aid,
for sure.
especially the rise and fall of SAPs.
It's a wild ride.
It is a wild ride.
Oh.
But before we move on, I want to highlight two very different examples of economic development.
Okay.
China and India.
Oh, yes. Two giants.
Two giants offering these fascinating case studies in navigating the global economic landscape.
For sure.
So did they follow the free market blueprint prescribed by institutions like the IMF and the World Bank?
Right.
Or did they forge their own paths?
That is a question we will explore in detail in the next part of our deep dive.
Stay with us. We'll be right back. After a quick word from our sponsors. And for our UPSC listeners out there, this is prime exam material, so keep those notes coming.
Welcome back to our deep dive into global inequality. Before the break, we were just about to kind of explore the contrasting development paths of China and India.
Right. These two economic powerhouses, they offer a really fascinating glimpse into how different approaches to development can yield really different results.
Absolutely.
So let's start with China. Did they fully embrace the free market model championed by the West?
You know, not quite. While China has certainly incorporated elements of free markets into its economic system,
Right.
it's done so very strategically and on its own terms, maintaining a pretty firm hand on the reins of economic control.
So it wasn't just a wholesale adoption of like Western-style capitalism.
Not at all. China's model has often been described as state capitalism,
Okay.
where the government plays a leading role in steering investments,
Right.
controlling key industries, and even managing its currency.
That's interesting because it kind of challenges the assumption that a completely free market is the only path to economic success.
It certainly does. China's rapid rise suggests that there are alternative models for development.
For sure.
Now, it's important to acknowledge that China's model has also drawn criticism
Right.
for its human rights record and limitations on political freedom.
Absolutely. Those are important aspects to consider.
For sure.
So turning to India, how does its development trajectory kind of compare to China's?
Well, India's path has leaned more towards liberalization,
Okay.
although it hasn't completely abandoned state controls and social safety nets.
So would you say that India embraced free markets more readily than China?
To a certain extent, yes. Back in the 1990s, India implemented some significant economic reforms,
Okay.
opened its doors wider to foreign investment, loosened government regulations.
And what has been the outcome of those reforms for India?
Well, India has witnessed some remarkable economic growth,
Yeah.
but it still faces challenges,
Right.
particularly when it comes to issues like poverty reduction and inequality.
So both China and India, they've achieved some pretty impressive growth.
They have.
But they've taken different routes and faced different sets of hurdles along the way.
Precisely. And their experiences really underscore the fact that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to development.
Right.
Each nation's path is shaped by its unique historical, political, and social context.
And this brings us back to a key point we've been exploring, right? The interconnectedness of our world.
Yeah.
For our UPSC aspirants out there,
Right.
understanding this interconnectedness is absolutely crucial.
Oh, absolutely.
Think about how economic disparities can drive migration patterns.
Right.
Or how resource scarcity can spark conflicts.
Yeah.
These are all issues that are linked to global inequality.
Absolutely. And it's not just about passing an exam. It's about comprehending the forces that are shaping global events and international relations.
Right.
This knowledge equips you to analyze situations to form informed opinions.
Of course.
And maybe even contribute to solutions down the line.
Right. I mean, so circling back to that big question we posed earlier, can we really afford to ignore global inequality?
I would say the answer is a resounding no.
Yeah.
We live in a world where inequality has ripple effects that extend far beyond national borders.
It's true.
It's like a spider web. A disturbance in one part can shake the entire structure.
That's a great analogy. So it's not just a matter of morality.
No.
It's about global security and stability.
Yeah.
For anyone who cares about building a just and peaceful world,
Right.
global inequality demands our attention.
Absolutely. It's a complex issue, but recognizing its significance is a crucial first step.
So if we accept that we can't simply ignore this issue, Where do we go from here?
Yeah.
What steps can we take to address such a complex challenge?
That's where things get really tricky.
Right.
There are no easy answers or quick fixes,
Right.
but acknowledging the interconnectedness of our world is a good starting point.
Yeah.
We need to move beyond this narrow nationalistic self-interest
Right.
and adopt a more global perspective.
So it's about recognizing that we're all in this together, that
Exactly.
our destinies are intertwined.
And that requires a shift in mindset,
Okay.
a willingness to prioritize cooperation and shared responsibility
Okay.
over competition and zero-sum thinking.
This ties back to something we discussed earlier, right? The idea that development models shouldn't be a one-size-fits-all prescription.
Absolutely. We need to move away from these top-down solutions that are often imposed by international institutions
Right.
and instead empower developing nations to chart their own courses,
Right.
taking into account their unique contexts and needs.
So it's about fostering genuine partnerships based on mutual respect and understanding,
Exactly.
rather than enforcing a particular ideology or economic model.
That's right. And it's about recognizing that development isn't just about boosting economic indicators.
Right.
It's about improving human well-being,
Of course.
promoting social justice, and ensuring environmental sustainability.
So while the path forward may be complex,
Yeah.
and there may not be any simple solutions,
Right.
we know that acknowledging global inequality and actively working towards a more just and equitable world is essential.
It's a challenge that demands our attention, our critical thinking, and our collective action.
Absolutely.
And for our listeners out there, especially those preparing for the UPSC exam,
Right.
these are the kind of complex global issues that you'll be grappling with.
It's not just about memorizing facts and figures.
No,
It's about developing a deep understanding of these interconnected challenges
exactly.
and exploring potential solutions. This deep dive is just a starting point,
Right.
a foundation for further exploration and analysis.
Well said. We've covered a lot of ground in this episode.
We have.
From the arguments for and against the significance of global inequality,
Right.
to the intricacies of development aid,
Of course.
and the contrasting experiences of economic giants like China and India.
It's been a dense but fascinating exploration,
It has.
and we hope you found it insightful.
I hope so.
But we're not done yet.
No, we're not.
In the final part of our deep dive, we'll delve even deeper into this complex landscape,
We will.
exploring potential solutions, ethical considerations, and what each of us can do to contribute to a more equitable world.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been kind of going deep on this issue of global inequality,
Wow.
looking at, the arguments for and against its significance, how different approaches to development have played out. We've
Right.
looked at things like, the rise and fall of those structural adjustment programs,
Yeah.
analyzed cases like China and India.
Right.
But now I think it's time to tackle the big question. Okay.
What can we actually do to address this?
Here's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is, and I think it's one that's particularly relevant for those UPSC aspirants out there
For sure.
who are grappling with these really complex global issues.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's no magic bullet.
No.
There's no single solution that will eradicate inequality overnight.
If only.
Right. But the first step, like we've been saying, is acknowledging that this is a problem
Yes.
that demands our attention.
You can't just sweep it under the rug.
Exactly. So awareness is key. But where do we go from there?
Right.
What concrete actions can individuals, governments, international organizations take to really make a difference?
Well, one crucial area to focus on is promoting fair trade practices.
Go.
For decades, many developing countries have been stuck in this system
Yeah.
where they primarily export raw materials and commodities
Right.
while importing finished goods.
Right.
This creates this imbalance where they're often getting the short end of the stick in terms of profits and economic benefits.
So it's about creating a more level playing field
Exactly.
where developing nations have a genuine opportunity to participate in the global economy
Right.
on more equitable terms.
On equal footing. Yeah. And this involves things like reducing trade barriers,
Right.
ensuring fair pricing for goods and services,
Okay.
supporting initiatives that help developing countries add value to their exports,
Right.
moving beyond just selling raw materials.
It reminds me of something we talked about earlier, right? This idea of empowering developing nations
Yes.
to chart their own development path.
Absolutely. We need to move away from that top-down approach
Yeah.
that often characterized development assistance in the past.
Right.
Instead of imposing solutions,
Right.
we should be supporting developing countries in identifying their own priorities,
Okay.
designing programs that align with their unique needs and circumstances.
So moving beyond a one-size-fits-all approach, recognizing that diversity of challenges and opportunities that exist.
Absolutely. Another critical area is investing in education and healthcare.
All right.
This is where those personal well-being aspects we talked about come in.
Right.
When people have access to quality education and healthcare,
Yeah.
it not only improves their individual lives,
Right.
but creates this ripple effect
Absolutely.
throughout society.
It's about breaking that cycle of poverty
Exactly.
and equipping people with the knowledge and the skills they need.
Right. And let's not forget about the role of technology.
Okay, how does that fit in?
Technology can be a powerful tool for bridging the gap between the haves and the have-nots.
Okay.
You think about access to information financial services,
Right.
even healthcare through mobile devices.
Yeah.
These innovations have the potential to empower individuals and communities in ways that were unimaginable just a few decades ago.
It's about harnessing the power of technology to kind of level the playing field
Exactly.
and create opportunities for everyone.
Regardless of their location or socioeconomic status, and of course, addressing climate change is crucial.
Right, because that disproportionately impacts
Absolutely.
the most vulnerable populations.
Climate change exacerbates existing inequalities and creates new ones.
It's a reminder that environmental sustainability and social justice are really interconnected.
They are, absolutely. Now, you might be thinking, this all sounds great,
Yeah.
but what can I as an individual actually do to make a difference?
That's a valid question.
It is.
It's easy to feel overwhelmed by the scale of these global challenges
Right.
and think that, my individual actions don't really matter.
But that's simply not true. Every action, no matter how small,
Right.
can contribute to positive change. You can start by educating yourself about global inequality,
Okay.
learning about the root causes and potential solutions.
Okay.
You can support organizations working to address these issues,
Okay.
whether through volunteering your time or making a donation.
Right. And don't underestimate the power of your voice. Speak up about these issues.
Yes.
Share information with your friends and family. Engage in those meaningful conversations.
Exactly. And for our UPSC aspirants out there, remember the exam is just one step in your journey.
It's true.
Use your knowledge and understanding of global inequality to inform your future actions as policymakers, diplomats, or in whatever field you choose to pursue.
Right, because ultimately addressing global inequality isn't just about passing an exam or writing a brilliant essay.
It's about creating a more just equitable and sustainable world for everyone.
Absolutely well said. It's a challenge that demands our attention, our creativity, and our unwavering commitment to building a better future.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
And for our listeners, whether you're preparing for the UPSC exam or simply seeking to engage with these complex global issues,
Right.
we hope this deep dive has given you some valuable insights and sparked a desire to learn more.
That's what we're here for.
If you found this exploration insightful, hit that like button and subscribe for more thought-provoking deep dives.
We'll see you next time.
We're here to help you navigate the complexities of our world one deep dive at a time.